Would you ask Mr. Marshall to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Marshall, still on the question of approved document B, if I may, were you, at least as of 2013 and onwards, familiar with diagram 40?
Yes.
Yes. And therefore, you knew that that was the provision for external surfaces and walls of buildings over 18 metres, which were required to be Class 0 or Class BS3 D2 or better?
Yes.
Yes. Did you believe at the time that both 12.7 and diagram 40 needed to be met in relation to an external wall, or did you think that it was an either-or approach?
In 2013, I didn't actually have a view. I wasn't looking at specific projects.
Right. Were you aware of what your colleagues or your surveyors thought? Did they think that both had to be met, or that it was a choice between the two?
In 2014...
13.
In 2013, I was unaware.
Right, OK. Well, we'll come back to that question later. Can I then turn to Kingspan and the BBA certificate, and with that introduction, go please to page 18 of your statement, paragraph 75. And you say this: in the period from 2005 to June 2017, I believe NHBC did provide building control and warranty services for buildings over 18 metres tall where K15 was used or specified for use. I was not involved with those specific projects, as this would have sat with the surveyors. My involvement would have been with policy guidance or reviews being carried out, as I address later in this statement. Now, why do you say "I believe" there? Were you not actually aware of what components your surveyors were approving in external walls over 18 metres?
I had no reason to be aware. The surveyors were professionally qualified. They were trained. They were following the approved document guidance. I didn't need to review every project. What we did introduce, I believe in 2014, when we structured the department with different levels of surveyor, we introduced quality monitoring to carry out peer reviews of projects to make sure that they were done in line with guidance.
Forgive me, the words "believe" there, what do they add to the sentence? I mean, are you telling us that you believe that was the case but it wasn't, or are you just saying in that period NHBC did provide building control, etc.?
NHBC would have provided building control in that period, yes.
When you say would have, did they or didn't they, to your knowledge?
Yes, to my knowledge, for K15 in accordance with the BBA certificate. Yes,
thank you. Now, we'll come back to that point, but if we go back to page 13 a little bit in your statement, paragraph 55D at the bottom of the page, you say this: at the very foot of the page, 3 lines up from the bottom of page 13, NHBC has identified the number of buildings of 5 stories or over which received final approval for building control purposes and or warranty cover each year. Steve Evans collated this information and it's listed in the table below. These figures should be taken as indicative of the number of blocks rather than exact, accurate totals. And there's the box with the figures in them. Now, I think just before we look at that, it's right, isn't it, that NHBC's Fusion system, its database, can't identify buildings by height, can it?
That's correct.
Only by stories?
Correct.
Yes, and that's why you've looked at buildings 5 stories or over?
I believe the 5 stories was at the request of the inquiry.
Right. But you wouldn't know what height they were?
Not without assessing each individual project.
No. Now, Steve Evans, in his evidence, referred to buildings 6 stories or over, and John Lewis, in his evidence, referred to buildings 8 stories or over. Can you account for that?
The reference to 6 stories would be the normal association with 18 metres, and that's quite common. I believe that John Lewis's reference to 8 stories was in relation to our major projects team.
Right. Now, and how did your surveyors ensure that they were correctly dealing with tall buildings where the metric measurement, if you like, in ADB was 18 metres if they were going by story numbers?
They'd measure it off the detailed drawings that were submitted as part of the application.
Right, I see. Now, if we go to the top of this page, we can see the table, as I've shown you there. And when you say that this number is, as you do, indicative of the number of blocks rather than an exact, accurate total, does that mean the number of actual buildings could be more or not?
I believe this was put together by Steve Evans, and he would have relied on fusion data around block heights in relation to stories. So that would have relied on the 5-storey threshold. In some cases, the blocks could be multiple blocks off a podium. So that might be why there could be a difference between the blocks and projects.
I understand the difference. I just want to know why you chose to use the words indicative. What's it indicating?
The number of blocks according to our records.
So your records don't show exact, accurate totals. What do they show?
Sorry, could you scroll back up the page, please?
Do you want to go to the bottom of page 13?
Yes, please.
Yes, let's do that.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think the information being pulled together by Mr. Evans would have been based on our fusion system, but I don't recall why it was indicative.
Right. Did somebody tell you that it was indicative, or was that your own personal understanding of the data?
I believe I was told that it was indicative.
Who told you that?
Mr. Evans.
I see. Now, at paragraph 55E under the table, if we go back to page 14, you say, based on the projects reviewed by Nhbc in 2015, described in paragraph 106 onwards, it is reasonable to assume over 90% of those projects use K15. Now, we've just seen in paragraph 75 of your statement that you said, I believe Nhbc did provide building and control and warranty services for buildings over 18 metres tall where K15 was used or specified for use. I think here you're saying that 90% of the projects you were providing services for were using K15. Is there a difference?
This statement is based on our review of projects in 2015. So that review of projects in 2015 looked at schemes that were registered predominantly from the 1st of January 2014 and projects in build prior to that date.
I see. Did you know at the time, i.e. 2015, when the project review was carried out, that 90% of your high-rise projects had used K15 in the external wall build-up?
Not the exact figure, but it was based on communications with the project managers that were looking after those projects. And I believe that the 90% was a reference to an email from Phil Pettinger. And not surprising that K15 was a popular choice of product because of the thermal insulation values that it offered.
Yes, forgive me, Ms. Marshall, I just want to know, you've given the 90% figure there. Was that a figure, or an assumed figure, known to you or in your mind at the time of this project review? Or is this something that you are opining on now?
No, it was based on the project review in 2015.
Right. Reading on at paragraph 55E, you say, the number of projects using RS 5000 would comparatively be very low. However, I cannot provide any other indication of the number of projects using RS 5000 or ACM with a PE core, save for the information on the 2015 and 17 reviews mentioned below. Why is it that you can't provide any other indication on projects using those materials or products?
The way that our fusion system works, it doesn't record every element of a construction project. It records the application being submitted, who by, the site address, and some of the key details around that development. The specifics around projects would be detailed within the construction drawings that are submitted as part of that project.
Right, so just help me. If NHBC wanted to know what building control approval or warranties had been awarded on, what records would NHBC look at?
There are high-level reports that can be run through Fusion on certain parameters, but if there's specific information relating to a project, it would be held into the project file.
So the project file is where one would go if one wanted to know whether a particular high-rise building or project, including a high-rise building, had K15 above 18 metres or an ACM panel above 18 metres. Is that right?
Correct.
And the project file would be accessible to you, would it?
Yes, in theory, if I could remember my password to the Fusion system.
Of course, but I mean, as a matter of course, you
yes.
would have no difficulty. There's nothing stopping you looking at it if you wanted to.
No.
No. Now, you say there that you can't provide an indication of the number of projects using ACM-PE. You don't say that NHBC projects didn't use ACM-PE. Do we take it from that NHBC was approving high-rise projects with ACM-PE in the years 2013 to 17? It's just that you don't know how many they were, or which they were.
Sorry, could you rephrase the question?
Well, looking at the sentence, you say, I can't provide any other indication of the number of projects using RS5000 or ACM with a PE core, save for the information you've referred to. Now, you don't say there that NHBC was not approving buildings over 18 metres using an ACM core as the rain screen panel. Can we take it that it was? But you just don't know the figures?
To my knowledge, it wasn't.
To your knowledge, it wasn't. And is that knowledge based on an analysis of the project files in those years?
No, it's based on the information between the 2015 and 2017 reviews.
Right. Now, looking at the tables at the top of page 14, again, if we can go to those as we can see them, you can see that the total that the NHBC provided services on was 1907, 1,907 buildings or blocks, numbers of blocks, yes?
Yes.
Of which 90%, so some 1,700, had K15 on, yes?
Potentially, yes.
Right. Why potentially?
Well, the assumption of 90%.
I follow. If we go to paragraph 70 of your statement at page 16, please, bottom of page 16 and over to page 17, you say this. Prior to 2014, my understanding was that K15 was a form of insulation widely used by the building industry due to its thermal performance. However, prior to learning from Chris Cooley that the BBA had updated its certificate for K15, I had not given the product much thought from a technical perspective. Indeed, I only became concerned by K15 when Steve Evans reported back to me following his review of the updated BBA certificate. Now, given that it was used on 90% of the buildings that NHBC were providing services for, why had you not even given it much thought?
It would have been assessed on its merits by my qualified surveyors doing day-to-day project checking.
If you go to paragraph 77 of your statement at the bottom of page 18, you say, prior to being informed of the change in the wording of the BBA certificate in early 2014, I was not aware of any reason why K15 could not be used on buildings over 18 metres tall. Now, isn't 12.7 of approved document B, the paragraph that says that all insulation material must be of limited combustibility, the reason why K15 cannot be and could never be used on buildings over 18 metres, at least in the absence of a full system test?
No, because they had a valid BBA certificate that allowed its use.
Despite the fact that it was combustible?
The BBA certificate certified it for use in buildings over 18 metres, subject to provisions.
Despite the fact that it was combustible?
The BBA certificate allowed its use, yes.
So the BBA certificate is viewed as overriding the guidance in ADB, is that what you're saying?
The BBA certificate is in the industry seen as a very high standard of independent testing of a product and certifying that product under UCAS accreditation. So it is held in very high regard, and it wouldn't be standard to challenge the finding of a BBA certificate.
But I think you're still saying that if there's a conflict between the BBA certificate and 12.7, the BBA certificate determines the outcome. Is that
Well,
what you're saying?
the guidance within the approved document sets out ways of demonstrating compliance. So 12.7 is within the guidance, as is the reference to third-party certification.
Yes, but you've got to ask yourself, what is it certifying, surely?
Yes, and that would have been assessed through the document of the BBA certificate.
All right, thank you very much.
Going back to 2013, and it's important that we stick in that year, because as we know, and we'll come to in a moment, the BBA certificate was changed. I want to know what was in your mind. Did you think, well, first of all, did you know at the time that K15 was a phenolic product?
I believe so, yes.
And that therefore, as a phenolic product, it was combustible?
Yes.
And therefore, as a combustible product, it could not ever be a material of limited combustibility?
Yes.
And therefore, as such, it could never satisfy 12.7?
Yes, but it could satisfy different routes to compliance.
Well, it's not what I asked you. Taking it in stages, 12.7, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Right. So K15, you knew in 2013, couldn't ever comply with 12.7, right?
Yes.
Right. In 2013, did you look at the BBA certificate?
I think I looked at the certificate when I was notified about the change in wording.
Right. So that must have been after 2013. To be fair, it was changed on the 17th of December, so I take it that between then and New Year's Eve you didn't look at it.
No,
No.
it would have been in early 2014.
Right, so you had no reason to think during 2013 that K15 could be allowed on any building above 18 metres?
Sorry, say that again.
Well, let me try it. There's an intervening stage. Did anybody tell you during 2013 that there was a BBA certificate which said that K15 met the requirements of 12.7? Did anybody tell you that, even though you didn't see the certificate?
I'm aware of it. I don't know when I was actually told, if it was 2013 or 2014.
Right. Now, given that you knew that K15 as a combustible insulation was not permitted on a high-rise building because of 12.7, what did you think in 2013 permitted its use on a high-rise building?
The BBA certificate.
But you hadn't seen it and no one had told you about it, so how come?
There would have been a review of the projects by the surveyors carrying out the compliance checking, and they would have looked at product materials and certification routes.
Do you know that?
Yes, it's standard practice.
Well, maybe, but did you know? Can you recall an occasion or a routine whereby during 2013 you were being told that K15 was going on buildings above 18 metres because of a BBA certificate, even though you hadn't seen it? Do you recall that?
I believe so.
You do?
Yes.
Were you not interested to understand how it could possibly be the case that a BBA certificate could permit the application of a combustible insulation material above 18 metres?
No, as I've stated, a BBA certificate was taken as independent certification of a product, and the surveyors would assess the content of the BBA certificate and ensure that it addresses all their concerns and then accept the product on that basis.
Were you not, at the very least, interested to know, given that you knew that it was a phenolic product and therefore not permitted above 18 metres under the linear route in ADB, how it could come about that the BBA certificate permitted it? Were you not interested to find that out for yourself?
In 2013?
Yes.
No, I think the status of a BBA certificate was well established.
It's not an answer to my question, with great respect. What I'm really keen to understand is why you were so, as it seems, incurious about how it could be that a BBA certificate could permit the use of a combustible insulation material above 18 metres, notwithstanding 12.7 of ADB. Are you able to tell us?
No. In my role, I wouldn't have necessarily got involved in drilling down to the day-to-day activities of all of my surveyors.
Did you become concerned, by reference to a 12.7, did you not become concerned later, in 2014, that the Nhbc had historically approved the use of K15 in so many blocks, over 300, I think?
No, on the basis of the BBA certificate.
Right. Even then, did you not wonder how the BBA certificate, once you had read it, the one that pertained until the 17th of December 2013, could possibly have allowed the use of K15 above 18 metres?
No, I saw no reason to challenge the credibility of a BBA certificate.
But it was incredible on its face, surely? Wasn't it?
No.
How come? Why no?
The standing of a BBA certificate in the industry is well regarded.
Even if it says the moon is made of green cheese?
It's unlikely to make that statement, but yes, it would be assessed by the surveyors on the basis of the technical content, and as long as the criteria were met, then the surveyors would accept it on that basis.
You say it was unlikely to make that statement. Why is it any more unlikely to make that statement than the statement that a phenolic insulation product could be permitted above 18 metres?
That's probably a question for BBA.
It's a question for you, Miss Marshall.
Well, I can't answer that question.
So are you telling us that even though you were faced with what you learnt to be a certificate that blessed the use of a combustible insulation material above 18 metres, notwithstanding 12.7, you were not concerned about it? Or were you concerned about it?
The BBA certificate allowed the use of the product, and as long as the terms of that certificate were met, we were complying with routes within the approved document.
Did it occur to you that the BBA certificate, at least on its face, suggested that a fundamental mistake had been made and that somebody in your organisation ought to pick up the phone to the BBA and work out how it had happened?
I don't recall the focus when the change happened in 2014. I think the focus of the change was around the wording of obtaining the permission of the certificate holder, and that was the query that created communications with BBA.
You were the person responsible at the time, 2013 and 14, both years, I think, for Nhbc's building control licence.
Yes.
In that role, were you not interested to get to the bottom of how the BBA certificate had said that K15 met the provisions of ADB 12.7?
Yes, and that's why Mr. Evans was tasked to investigate.
With whom?
With the product manufacturer, as in Kingspan. I don't believe there was any contact with BBA at that stage, but there was later on.
2015, late in 2015, almost 2 years later.
I believe it was early 2015 that Ian Davis made contact and Mike Quinton made contact.
Well, we can come back to that. It's still a long time after late 2013. Were you not concerned to get to the bottom at speed as the person responsible for Nhbc's building control licence with how it could be the case that a BBA certificate could bless the use of K15 above 18 metres?
When it was brought to my attention, absolutely, which is why I asked Steve Evans to investigate. And the most direct route for investigation was to go to the product manufacturer, who would have had all of the information available that they sent to BBA. From previous experience, BBA have a commercial arrangement with any company that they certify, so they wouldn't generally release any confidential or commercial information to a third party. So the decision was taken to go direct to the manufacturer.
Right. I mean, the question would have been a one-liner to the BBA, wouldn't it? You've put 12.7 in your certificate. How come? It's a phenolic. Surely they would have been the first port of call, no?
No, we went direct to Kingspan
Why?
as the product manufacturer to give us the information that the BBA had relied upon.
But why would the product manufacturer be more reliable than the independent UCAS certified body whose statement you were so keen to rely on because of what ADB says?
Because they would have had direct access and permissions to release that data, whereas BBA may not have.
But what data were you expecting, given that no phenolic could be used above 18 metres?
The test data that supported the BBA certificate and any other data that had been provided to BBA.
Did you think at the time, therefore, that it was possible that there could be some test data which could support the use of a phenolic insulation material above 18 metres as a material of limited combustibility? Did you think that?
Not as a material of limited combustibility, but
No.
there may have been other data that was provided to BBA to make the statement around the certificate holder.
No, let's be absolutely precise, Ms Marshall. 12.7.
Mm-hmm.
What data did you think Kingspan could provide you with which would show you that K15 as a material of limited combustibility satisfied 12.7?
That wasn't the focus of our attention.
Why not?
The focus was the removal of the clause regarding the certificate holder.
Let's go to your statement, page 12, please, paragraph 52. And you say there, between 2013 and 2014, I was head of NHBC's Technical Services Department. In this capacity, I attended regular monthly meetings around the country. At one meeting, Chris Cooley, one of NHBC's qualified surveyors, reported a change in the BBA certificate for Kingspan Cooltherm K15. This was the first I knew of such a change, and so far as I'm aware, Kingspan had not informed anyone in my team directly. Following the meeting, I asked Steve Evans to review the change and to decide if the change and any other information needed to be shared more widely within NHBC. Now, how up to date were you with the BBA certificates for K15 before that point?
I knew of their existence. I wouldn't be familiar with the content.
Yes. And what change to the certificate are you referring to there?
The removal of the statement regarding the certificate holder.
I see. And is that the statement that says in... I'll read it out to you if we can go to it if you like, but in buildings with the floor more than 18 metres above ground level, advice should be sought from the certificate holder.
Correct.
It's that,
yes.
is it? Right. Were you aware that the original BBA certificate for Kingspan K15 had been published on the 27th of October 2008?
I can't recall if I was aware at just prior to this, but when this came to my attention, we looked at previous certificates.
And then it was amended, I think, in 2010, and then again in 2013. The precise date is the 12th of July 2013, which said that K15 could be used in accordance with 12.7 of approved document B, among other bits of ADB. Mm-hmm. Were you aware of that?
I don't recall being particularly aware of that statement. The statement that caused concern was the removal of the certificate holder.
And that was... I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
And that was, I think, on the 17th of December 2013 when the revised BBA certificate was published by the BBA, which removed both that clause and the reference to 12.7.
Correct.
Yes. And you knew that at the time, did you? Or did you discover that later?
I discovered that later.
Do you know when?
The sentence regarding certificate was immediate in terms of when the surveyor brought it to my attention, because he sent me a copy of the latest certificate. The 12.7 clause, I don't recall when that came to my attention.
Right. Now, you say that Chris Cooley, who was an NHBC surveyor, reported a change to the BBA certificate for K15, and that your colleagues John Lewis and Steve Evans also made reference to Chris Cooley in their evidence. And they raised issues with K15, but that was before the publication in December of the revised version. Do you think that you might be mistaken and that your reference here to Chris Cooley is raising an issue with the combustibility of K15 rather than the BBA certificate itself?
No, that was one of the reasons I wanted the correction to my statement, because looking back through my statement and the associated documents and my colleagues' witness statements, there was an email from Steve Evans early in December that addressed or was addressing the points that Chris Cooley had raised regarding the material of limited combustibility, and the separate issue regarding the removal of the certificate holder was only known early in 2014.
Let's see if we got this right. Can we go, please, to NHB 50594? This is an email which the inquiry's seen before from Chris Cooley. And if we go, please, to page 3. It's the email from Chris Cooley to Brian Stevenson of the 8th of November 2013. And we can read it together. It says...
It's on my screen yet.
It's on yours. It's page 3. Brian, any idea how long Steve and John will take, as we're involved with design team meetings and need to pass on our requirements at the outset of the design process? If we're not going to accept K15, what are the alternatives? As far as we are aware, there are no other foam insulation boards that meet the requirements, so all high-rise will be forced to use rock wool. As you can imagine, this will cause a major issue with our customers as they all use board insulation to gain their U values. I hope Steve is ready to take the barrage of inquiries. And the background to that is the question of combustibility. And my question for you is, at this time, November 2013, were you alerted to this problem?
I believe I was copied into the email that Steve sent out early in December 2013, advising that Steve and John were looking into the matter.
That's the 2nd of December 2013 email, and I think we may need to come to that.
Correct.
But not. I think you're saying not until then, is that right?
Yes.
I follow. Now, we've explored with your colleagues at NHBC in their evidence that concerns were raised about the use of K15 as a combustible insulation material as early as August 2013. So some 4 months or so before the change to the BBA certificate. Were you aware of that, or was that only something that you learnt in December?
Not that I recall. I recall the December email being the first one that I had seen.
Are you sure about that?
From recollection?
Well, we'll come to see some of the documents in a moment. At that point, December, 2nd of December 2013, the NHBC, the BBA certificate for Kingspan K15 had not been changed and still contained the contact the manufacturer clause and the reference to 12.7. Did you know that at that stage?
Yes.
So you did know that at that stage. Did you see it at that stage?
No, the email from Steve Evans on the 2nd of December set out the issues around the BBA certificate and the confusion that it was causing in relation to being material of limited combustibility or not, as the case may be. And that was my sort of early exposure to the issue around K15.
Right. Were you aware of NHBC's practice, or a practice at NHBC, of seeking confirmation from Kingspan on build-ups on every building over 18 metres that use K15 in accordance with the contact the manufacturer provision in the erstwhile BBA certificate?
I believe that that did happen.
So were you aware at the time that that was the practice?
I can't recall when I became aware of that.
Do you know whether that practice grew up as a result of a decision made by NHBC to do just that, or did it evolve? Do you know?
In February 2015, when the policy changed to look at the approach to the BBA certificate, there was a reinforcement of the requirement to obtain a letter if it hadn't been already obtained.
Was the practice of contacting the manufacturer something that, to your knowledge, began in 2008, after October 2008, when the BBA certificate was first published, which contained that provision, or did it come later?
I can't say.
When you discovered the existence of the contact the manufacturer provision in the erstwhile BBA certificate, were you not sceptical at all that a manufacturer of insulation could give a reliable, robust and independent fire engineering view on whether its own product could or should be used above 18 metres?
I wasn't overly familiar with the most recent layout or content of a range of BBA certificates, so I didn't know if that was an unusual statement or not. And I think my colleague earlier in the week advised that in some cases talking to a manufacturer about how their product can be used is not unusual.
Were you, it's not quite an answer to my question, I'm afraid. When you discovered the existence of the contact the manufacturer provision in the BBA certificate, doing the best you can to recall when that was, my question is, were you not sceptical that a manufacturer should be the person to be asked? Is this suitable over 18 metres?
No, for the reasons I stated in my previous response.
But doesn't that tell us that all the BBA certificate is doing is offhanding the technical decision to the person who makes the product? How is that independent or reliable?
It's within the terms of the BBA certificate.
Yes, and how is it that?
Yeah, I have to say I'm having difficulty with this, Ms. Marshall. You explained that the BBA certificate is highly regarded in the industry because it's independent. If we read this certificate as saying, go and ask the manufacturer whether the product's suitable, where's the independence?
I can see how that would be viewed, but that was the view within the industry, that a BBA certificate could be held in that regard, where as long as you followed the conditions of that certificate, you satisfied the requirements of the building regulations.
So it was a slavish following of a piece of paper, really, to put it unkindly.
Well, a piece of paper produced by an accredited body that was well recognised.
But of course, it wasn't the accredited body that was going to give the opinion on which suitability depended, was it?
No, not by the condition that was in the certificate, but again, an assumption from reading the certificate that the BBA had been furnished with suitable evidence to enable them to make that statement.
Well, the statement simply said, go and ask the manufacturer. What information would they be furnished with that would enable them to do that?
I don't know. That's a question
Quite hard to see,
potentially for BBA.
Yes. All right, thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Let's see if we can identify this passage in ADB. I've got here. Can we please go to it, which is at CLG 224, page 7. Thank you. Now, on the right-hand side, this is the use of the guidance, and it's right at the very start, the very first substantive page of the document, as I'm sure you're aware. And it says use of guidance, and then halfway down the right-hand column, there's a heading towards the bottom of your screen that says independent certification schemes. And then if you see that the words in bold in the middle there, and underneath that, you will see the following. Building control bodies may accept the certification of products, components, materials or structures under such schemes as evidence of compliance with the relevant standard. Is that the sentence on which you are, or to which you are referring when you say that ADB permitted reliance on certificates such as those issued by the BBA?
Yes.
It is, right. And you'll note the words may there, and you'll note the words as evidence there. Was it your thinking, your own thinking at the time, Miss Marshall, that the presence of a BBA certificate was essentially a free pass, even though you had reasons to be sceptical of it? In other words, whatever it said.
The status and standing of a BBA certificate within the industry was an accepted practice in certifying products and systems.
Well, I can understand that if the certificate identifies how compliance is achieved, in other words, by what route or by what test. But how is that sentence, did you understand it at the time, how was that sentence satisfied by an assertion or statement in a BBA certificate which simply said, seek the advice of the manufacturer? How was that evidence of compliance?
I think it goes back to the status and standing of a BBA certificate, allowing the use of a product with limitations, and those limitations may or may not be common, I don't know, in relation to how other BBA certificates are worded. There is an acceptance of talking to manufacturers about how their products may or may not be used. So it didn't create alarm bells.
Have you ever come across a certificate other than this BBA certificate that had said, if you want to use this product in a particular above 18 metres, contact the manufacturer?
Not personally, no.
To your knowledge, had any of your surveyors?
I don't know.
You don't
I
know?
can't answer that question.
Because you hadn't asked them either, presumably.
No.
Did it not strike you as at least an odd thing that you might want to ask them about? Go to them and say, that's a bit funny. Is that common? Did you ask them that?
I think the people that I spoke with regarding the wording would have included Steve Evans and John Lewis. And as per John's statements, talking to manufacturers was not unusual.
Now, let's look at an email chain from November 2013. NHB...
Before we leave this, can I just... sorry to keep interrupting, Mr. Millett. Can I just ask you this? Your answer suggests that it may have been beyond anyone's contemplation that a BBA certificate might include an inadvertent mistake. Did you ever think that was possible?
At the time, no. Because of the rigour of UCAS accreditation and the process that it would have to go through to get produced. So, no, at that time, there was no reason to question the validity or the content of a BBA certificate.
However apparently incorrect a statement might be.
At that time.
Well, I asked the question because we know that in the certificate that was in being until December 2013, there was a statement that the Kingspan product complied with or could be used in accordance with paragraph 12.7 of ADB. At the moment, I speaking entirely for myself, don't see how that could possibly be true, since it was a combustible product. It would at least alert someone to the possibility of a mistake, might it not?
It may have done, but my attention and my focus was drawn to the removal of the certificate clause rather than the particular paragraphs of the approved document that were referenced.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
NHB 50594, then, please. Now, this is an email run from November 2013. So, just to put it in the chronological context, Ms. Marshall, it's before the BBA certificate was amended the following month. Mm-hmm. And if we go to the email at the foot of the chain, from the 4th of November 2013, from Paul Williams to the Southwest Area Technical Team, which is now on your screen at the foot there, Surveyors, all it says, Amanda raised a question on the use of Kingspan K15 insulation in wall constructions in buildings over 18 metres. Steve Evans and John Lewis are currently reviewing whether we can accept this product for use in this situation, as we have doubts with respect to the combustibility aspect of the product. We will continue to accept it in ongoing projects that have started and where it's being built in. We won't be accepting it on new projects until we've carried out further investigation / research into the combustibility aspects of the product. Now, we then see that Chris Cooley, if you scroll up, please, to page 3, Chris Cooley forwards that to Brian Stevenson, and I've shown you that. That's the barrage of inquiries email. Yeah. You see that. Now, I think you will accept that just looking at this as a matter of chronology, the NHBC's concerns with K15 in respect of its combustibility arose before the BBA certificate for K15 had been amended. Yes?
Yes.
As a matter of chronology. And do you accept that to stop accepting K15 would, as Chris Cooley says, create a barrage of inquiries?
There certainly would have been questions raised when the product had a valid BBA certificate in place.
And in the line above that, a major issue with your customers. Yes?
Yes, for the same reason.
Yes. Did Steve Evans and John Lewis discuss with you at that time the potential, quotes, major issue, unquotes, and the potential for a barrage of inquiries that would arise if NHBC stopped accepting K15?
Not to my recollection. I believe I saw the email on the 2nd of December.
Given your position as head of technical services and the commercial side of the business that you were responsible for, and as the person in charge of holding the licence, did you consider, or were you asked to consider, the effect that refusing to accept K15 on high-rise buildings might have on the performance of NHBC BCS Limited?
Not that I recall, no.
Now let's then go to NHB 50597, which is an email run a little bit later in the month, November 2013. This is an email chain to which you were added on the 19th of November, as we can see from the email on the screen in front of you, yes?
Yes.
John Lewis to Steve Evans and Brian Stevenson, copied to, among others, Chris Cooley and you, Ms. Marshall, yes? And the heading, Combustible Cladding Systems in Buildings Exceeding 18 metres in Height, Notes from Wintec Meeting. So we can be clear, can't we? Tell me if this is wrong, but you received this email and the string below it. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, and indeed, in fact, you're actually copied in earlier on in the string, but we can see that. Now, do you remember this email chain?
Yes.
Yes. Now, it refers to a meeting with Wintec that you, of course, were not at. If we go to page 3, we can see the moment when you were added to the email chain. Should we just do that? Page 3. This is the email from Brian Stevenson on the 19th of November 2013 to Steve Evans and John Lewis, copied to you. And it says, guys, has this technical guidance note been approved? As if so, I'd like to cover at my team meeting on Friday. And when you were copied into that, did you scroll down below it and look down to page, what is now page 4, and see the email from John Lewis to Steve Evans? If we go to page 4, please. You can see it. Email John Lewis, 15th November 2013, to Steve Evans, Graham Perrier, Dave White and Gary Jarvis, subject combustible cladding systems, etc. Did you scroll down and look at it?
I'm sure I would have done.
Yes. And you would have noticed then that there were some notes from this morning's meeting, yes, together with the first draft of an internal guidance note, yes?
Yes.
And would you have looked at the notes that Mr. Lewis had carefully set out below here and the guidance note?
Don't believe that the guidance note would have been attached.
Well, he attaches it to this. But do you remember reading it?
I don't believe I got the guidance note by having been copied in later on.
All right. Well, let's look at the email. And we've seen you were copied into the last 4 emails in the chain when the notes from the meeting are being discussed and the proposal that it should be made into a BCA guidance note. Presumably you recall reading that part of the chain, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, again, reinforcing the point, this is before you were, well, before the BBA amended its certificate, let alone before you became aware of that amendment, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we look at the email at the top of the chain, please, into which you're copied, John Lewis says in the second paragraph, from what I gather from Wintec, Kingspan K15 was tested in one instance on a masonry wall construction. On this basis, Kingspan claimed that it's suitable for use in buildings over 18 metres high. But when you dig down to the detail, it's only acceptable if the wall construction is exactly the same as that tested. Most of our schemes are steel framed with a METSEC or similar external wall build-up, and so the Kingspan test doesn't hold true. And if we follow the ADB and BR 135 guidance, we shouldn't be accepting it. Even with a cementitious linerboard, the product is still combustible and so doesn't meet ADB 2 recommendations. According to Wintec, Kingspan proposed to test multiple combinations of cladding, liner and insulation, but didn't see this through after the first test. And do you accept that as of 19th November 2013, it was made crystal clear to you by your own fire engineer, Mr. Lewis, that other than for one masonry build-up as specified, K15 was not to be used above 18 metres because it was not a material of limited combustibility?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Certainly. Do you accept that as of the 19th of November 2013, it was made crystal clear to you by your own fire engineer, Mr. John Lewis, that other than for one masonry build-up as specified, K15 was not to be used above 18 metres because it was not a material of limited combustibility?
I believe that this raised questions over the Kingspan BBA certificate, and from reading through the content further down, it was a topic that was going to be discussed with the BCA technical group, and Steve Evans was taking it to the BCA technical group to check that that was the common understanding around the use of the certificate. Because I think the BCA technical group meeting was early in December.
That's right, the 8th. And we're going to look at that in a minute, but or we may do. But were you at that meeting?
No, that was the technical group meeting.
Yeah. And the minutes that we can see suggest that you weren't present. But what I'm asking you is a different question, which is, when you got this, did you not realise that K15 couldn't be used over 18 metres because it hadn't passed an 8414 test except in one particular configuration and wasn't a material of limited combustibility? Never mind the BBA certificate. Did you realise that?
I recognise that there were questions being raised, but again, the BBA certificate was still in force.
Yes, what I'm really trying to get to is, if you forget the piece of paper for the moment, the BBA certificate, whether this email chain alerted you to the fact that K15 shouldn't be used above 18 metres because it was neither a material of limited combustibility nor had passed a BS 8414 test in any other than one configuration.
I think it suggested that it needed further investigation.
Do you know why it was that Wintec had, or appeared to have, more understanding and knowledge of ADB and combustible insulation and its use over 18 metres than NHBC, the largest provider of building control and warranty services in the country?
I don't have any dealings with Wintec, so I can't answer that question.
All right. Can you explain why it was an industry participant that had brought these issues to the NHBC's attention and had to warn NHBC about the possible dangers of the use of K15 over 18 metres rather than NHBC coming to that conclusion unaided?
No, I can't answer that question.
As head of technical services at the time, was it not your responsibility to address that issue?
The questions that were raised through this communication were being reviewed by Steve Evans in conjunction with the BCA technical group to get a broader industry view on what the challenges were. And that was a suitable way of gathering what the industry was doing and if the interpretation was in fact correct.
At this time, did you consider escalating this question of the acceptability of K15 and the potential major issue to Ian Davis, even just by way of gently alerting him to a possible problem?
I don't recall at that time.
No. Why is that?
Because it needed further investigation to establish the credibility of the claims and the industry view, a broader industry view.
We don't have a record of you yourself taking any particular steps, having received this email chain, to address the potential issue that had arisen on behalf of NHBC Building Control. Did you take any steps?
I think that on the back of this, that prompted the communication from Steve Evans to the broader business in relation to what action was being taken by the organisation in reviewing the BBA certificate and the engagement with BCA technical.
Yes. Did you do anything? I'm sorry to keep repeating the question, but I'm not really confident I'm getting the answer to my questions. Did you yourself personally do anything?
No, I delegated to Steve Evans.
What did you tell him to do?
Investigate or take this matter through to the BCA and see what the issues were.
Right. Did it occur to you at the time that the fact that it had fallen to an industry participant to alert NHBC to the problem indicated some kind of defect within NHBC as an organisation, such as the lack of sufficient expertise at the appropriate levels?
No.
Why is that?
We get information from a number of industry bodies, manufacturers and other organisations that contact us to talk about products, materials, systems on a regular basis. That is normally a two-way engagement process. So it's not uncommon for us to engage with other industry bodies.
But your resident fire engineer, who by this date had his qualifications, John Lewis, had, as he was telling you, dug down into the detail and had come to the conclusion that K15 couldn't be used above 18 metres if the wall construction wasn't exactly the same as tested. That's what it says on the screen. What further was there to investigate?
The details within the BBA certificate and the background to the BBA certificate that was contrary to that statement.
And given what John Lewis was saying, and given what the BBA certificate said, which was diametrically opposite, why did you not think at that stage to ask, and I've asked you this before, but to go to the BBA immediately and say, we don't think this K15 can actually be used above 18 metres. The only reason we're continuing to accept it is because your certificate says so. Are you sure it's right?
I think, as I've explained previously, BBA would have been held by a confidential commercial arrangement, and we wanted to get the information from the manufacturer direct.
And following the logic of the BBA certificate statement to consult Kingspan, at this point now, once you're alerted to the problem by your own resident fire engineer, how did you think that advice from Kingspan could either change the combustibility of the product or make it compliant, given that this was, as any fool know, a phenolic product and therefore combustible?
At that stage, the engagement with Kingspan was to try and establish if there was further test data or any evidence that was available to BBA that we hadn't had sight of.
Do you agree that as Head of Technical Services, you should have been aware that K15 was not a material of limited combustibility and that its widespread use on buildings above 18 metres was in contravention of the guidance in 12.7? Do you accept that?
I accept that we acted within the boundaries of the BBA certificate.
And can you explain why NHBC has continually, even through the inquiry, continually tried to use the change to the BBA certificate as a reason why K15's compliance with the building regulations changed when it was clear that it could never have complied with ADB, save in that one very specific instance, and that the NHBC knew that before the change in the certificate anyway?
The reliance was on the wording within the BBA certificate.
It's a slender thread, isn't it, Miss Marshall, on which to hang such a momentous a decision?
It is, but it's a route to compliance that's allowed through the approved documents and the guidance.
Now let's turn to the email you've referred to.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is all to do with fire safety, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's why ADB made certain suggestions as to the way to comply with functional requirement B4. Whatever the BBA certificate said, did anyone stop to ask the question, well, if this material is combustible, it may not be safe?
I think the evidence of the BBA certificate was given very high regard in relation to the status, and the link back to sort of overarching functional requirements of the building regulations would have been considered. It didn't meet 12.7, as we've explored, but the fact that the BBA certificate was in its existence and allowing the use of that product with conditions was satisfactory from our point of view as a building control body.
So it was safe if Kingspan told you it was safe?
Subject to the conditions within the certificate, yes.
Well, those were the conditions, weren't
Yes.
they? The ones at least that you were relying on.
Yes.
And that was satisfactory, was it?
We believe so, yes.
Right. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Winter.
Can we then go to the 2nd of December 2013 email, please, at NHB 50616? This is an email from Steve Evans of the 2nd of December 2013 to Technical Services, building surveyors, commercial surveying team, project managers, project surveyors. And copy to technical services managers. Did you see this at the time?
I would have been in the copied in group.
Oh, the technical services managers, yes, I see. Dear all, it says, there has recently been some confusion in respect of the use of Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board in buildings over 18 metres in height. The confusion has arisen from Kingspan's statement that their product is acceptable for use in a building over 18 metres. However, the product is made from a generic type of polyurethane foams which are by nature combustible. The product holds a current BBA certificate attached, which indicates that it is acceptable for use in accordance with Approved Document B, Volume 2, Paragraph 12.7, 7.1, subject to advice being should be sought from the certificate holder 7.2 if the building exceeds 18 metres in height. We are currently investigating this with Kingspan and we are awaiting a response from them. Until we are in a position to say otherwise, NHBC's BCS's current policy is to accept in principle the use of this material in rain screen and masonry construction over 18 metres, subject to the necessary advice from Kingspan being received and agreed by us for each system build-up. Now again, in terms of chronology, this was written before the change to the BBA certificate, removing the reference to 12.7 and the contact the manufacturer clause, self-evidently. It's clear, therefore, isn't it, at this stage, that you and the NHBC generally, as we can see from the vast number of people who received this, that everybody knew that K15 was combustible and couldn't comply with 12.7. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. What did you think you would get from Kingspan, by way of investigation, that you wouldn't get from the BBA? If you'd asked them.
Further test evidence that supported its use in a wider range of makeups.
So, right. So does that mean that you weren't interested in exploring with Kingspan how it had come about that 12.7 had been used in the VBA certificate? You were interested in whether or not Kingspan could provide you with further test evidence under 8414. Is that what you were about?
We were looking, the main point of interest from the investigations, as I saw it, was the removal of the statement, and we were investigating on what basis that statement was included in the first place, of seeking the advice of the certificate holder.
Well, at this stage, I'm not sure actually still that's an answer to my question. Why not go to the BBA and ask them what they thought they were doing in producing the document that you rely upon, rather than going to Kingspan?
As I've said, we didn't.
And at this stage, of course, the clause hasn't been removed. So the question is, what's it doing there? But you didn't. Now, in the last paragraph, it says, until we are in a position to say otherwise, we will accept in principle the use of K15. Why were you not in a position to say otherwise? Surely you were.
Because of the existence of the BBA certificate.
But everybody knew that was wrong by now. So, certainly so far as 12.7 was concerned, and you didn't have any information from Kingspan on which to justify its use over 18 metres. So how come you were not in a position to refuse K15 over 18 metres?
We didn't know that the BBA certificate was wrong at this stage.
Well,
We raised questions over the content, but we didn't know that the BBA certificate was wrong.
well, we've been through that,
Yes.
and you're not able to tell us on what possible scientific basis this phenolic product could possibly meet 12.7.
No, but whether or not there was further evidence that supported the inclusion of the reference to the certificate holder was also in our minds later on.
We've been through that as well. Given that on the face of the information you had at that time, do you accept that you were not in fact in a position to accept the use of K15, given that its use over 18 metres, at least on what you knew at that point, contravened 12.7?
No, because of the BBA certificate. There was,
Right.
I don't think I can emphasise enough the strength of the BBA certificate that was used as the basis for the decisions taken.
Very well. Were you aware that letters were being received by NHBC from Kingspan, which would, it was thought, constitute the necessary advice?
I was aware. I couldn't tell you exactly when I became aware.
Were you aware? Well, did you look at any at this point?
No.
So, well, why not?
It would have been on a project-specific basis for the surveyor to manage the process.
Well, at this stage, you've got an unamended BBA certificate that says what it says about 12.7 and then says contact the manufacturer. Were you not interested to know what the manufacturer was saying in respect of use of K15 above 18 metres when asked, given that that was the only other basis on which NHBC could possibly accept Kingspan K15 above 18 metres compliant with the BBA certificate?
No, I had other people within my team that were more than capable of dealing with a project-specific review and identifying the evidence that was being presented.
Did you not want to know yourself, what does this advice look like? How is it? What are Kingspan actually doing when they're asked so that K15 is allowed above 18 metres? Did you not want to know that?
Not at this stage, no.
Why is that?
I trusted my colleagues to carry out their roles and functions.
Did you actually ask them to undertake an investigation of what it was that Kingspan was saying by way of advice given in accordance with the BBA certificate?
Yes, but I can't recall when.
Did anybody come back to you and tell you what the advice was that Kingspan was giving?
I think I did see some correspondence, but I can't recall when I would have seen that.
Did you know at the time that the advice that was coming back from Kingspan, if asked pursuant to clause 7.2 of the BBA certificate, was bald and generic and contained no analysis whatever, as Mr. Lewis fairly accepted in his evidence, about why and how the proposed wall build-up would adequately resist the spread of fire over the surface of the walls?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, I'll try it more shortly. Did you know at the time that the advice that was coming back when asked from Kingspan was bald and generic?
Only when I became aware of that advice.
When was that?
I can't recall.
Let's have a look at an example. KIN 402663. This is a letter from Kingspan to a design and build contractor, Mount Anvil, in respect of a project called the Eagle House and the use of K15 at it, 13th of January 2014. And it says this: further to our previous discussion to date regards the Eagle House project and the use of cool foam K15 within the ventilated rain screen facade system in a building with a story of 18 metres or more above ground level, we can confirm the following. It is our opinion that our cool foam K15 product would be fit for purpose if installed onto a non-combustible substrate with horizontal cavity barrier installed in line with intermediate floors and at centres not exceeding 3.5 metres. We trust the foregoing information is of assistance, and in the event of any further queries, please do not hesitate to contact the undersigned. Now, if you saw that particular letter, let me know, but did you see letters like this at the time?
I don't recall seeing this particular letter.
This letter doesn't contain any analysis whatever, does it, about why and how the precise proposed wall build-up would adequately resist the spread of fire over the surface of the walls, does it?
No.
No. It's bald and generic, isn't it?
It's relating to a project and it's sent to the builder that's developing that project, so they would have had access to all of the design information.
This was an NHBC job, wasn't it?
I couldn't confirm. I don't know. I don't recognise any of the references.
Right, no, I'm not surprised you don't personally know. Take it from me. But it is actually in your 2015 review, so that's why I know that. And if you tell me that's wrong, then I'll accept that from you. But on the basis that it is, does this mean that your surveyor, confronted with a building with proposed insulation in the external wall build-up of a building more than 18 metres, where Kingspan is proposed, K15 is proposed, looks at the BBA certificate and goes to Kingspan for advice and gets this, on what basis would your, let it be assumed, independent, reliable, robust, and ruthlessly investigative surveyor think that that statement there indicated that the proposed wall build-up would adequately resist the spread of fire over the surface of the walls?
On two counts, one in accordance with the BBA certificate.
No, sorry, that I'm going to interrupt you. That doesn't work. The BBA certificate simply takes you here. So this is what he's got. Let me rephrase the question. Your surveyor holds this document in his hand. What tells him that Cooltherm K15 is fit for purpose in this particular project, in the absence of a BS 8414 test?
The statement made by Kingspan in the second paragraph, being fit for purpose, and the assumption that as this has been sent to the builder, that Kingspan would have been furnished with the design information around the project and based their statement on details of the construction.
And is it your evidence that, so far as the Nhbc was concerned, that opinion was a satisfactory basis or a satisfactory piece of evidence of compliance?
In accordance with the BBA certificate, yes.
I would like you to answer the question without the qualification. Is that evidence of compliance?
I don't think I can answer it without the qualification because it links to the BBA certificate.
Well, you see, the reason I put it to you that way, as I tried to explain before, is that the BBA certificate was simply a route. It was simply telling you to go and contact the manufacturer. Yes? It's not evidence itself, is it?
Advice should be sought, I think is the
and
word.
so when you go and get the advice, this is what you get.
Yes.
And my question, I'll ask it the last time, is that if this was the kind of advice that you were getting, was it NHBC's position that this was satisfactory evidence on the basis of which K15 could safely be used above 18 metres, Miss Marshall?
Yes.
Without further investigation?
I don't want to keep repeating myself, but in accordance with the BBA certificate.
Now, can we go to your statement? Well, Mr. Chairman, we're, I think, mid-topic, and it'll take me a little bit longer to finish it off. Perhaps this is a convenient moment.
Yes, very well. I think it's time we had a break, Ms. Marshall. So we'll stop there. We'll resume, please, at 25 to 4. And as before, I have to ask you not to speak to anyone about your evidence when you're out of the room. All right?
Yes,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 25 to 4, please. Would you ask Ms Marshall to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, Ms Marshall, ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes,
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Ms Marshall, did you inform the BCS board that you were telling surveyors to continue to accept K15 on or around or after the 2nd of December 2013?
The BCS board were updated, but I couldn't recall when.
Did you tell the BCS board at that time that even though you were aware that K15 was combustible, didn't comply with 12.7 and shouldn't be used above 18 metres in the absence of a specific build-up test successfully under BS 8414, nonetheless, the BCS board was continuing to accept it in principle? Did you tell them that?
As I say, the BCS board were updated, but I couldn't recall what dates they were updated on the issue.
Right. Were they ever told of that holding arrangement?
I believe so.
Were they told of the knowledge, notwithstanding which that holding arrangement was put in place?
I can't recall.
Now, we don't need to go back to the table in your statement. We looked at it earlier, but 90%, assumed, I think you said, 90% of the 368 blocks or projects on which Nhbc provided building control and warranty in 2013 used K15. Were you concerned at this time, early December 2013, that to refuse K15 on buildings over 18 metres would mean that up to 90% of the schemes on which, or buildings on which Nhbc were working would be affected?
Not at that point in time, no.
Did you discuss that possibility with Steve Evans?
Only when the BBA certificate changed.
Was the fact that refusing K15 might cause a major issue and a barrage of inquiries a factor in the decision, which I think you accept as ultimately yours, to continue to accept K15 in the interim?
Sorry, repeat the start of the question.
Yes. Was the fact that refusing K15 might cause, quotes, a major issue, unquotes, as we've seen from the email, or a barrage of inquiries, as we've seen from the email in November, was that a factor in the decision, your decision, to continue to accept K15 on tall buildings, at least in the meantime?
No.
Not at all?
No. At the end of the day, we want to achieve compliant buildings.
Yes. But here was a real risk that buildings that you were approving weren't. So why not stop? Unless it was something to do with trouble with customers.
No, the customer angle had no consideration. It was about compliance with whatever route was available through the approved documents and the guidance.
Given the doubts, why did you not stop pro tem until the doubts were resolved, rather than continuing pro tem until Kingspan proved it was safe?
I think we were taking the approach that we were proactively seeking solutions by engaging with the manufacturer to get information that would support its use in configurations that were being presented to us.
Do you accept now that you should have advised your surveyors back in December 2013 that K15 should not be used over 18 metres unless it was used in the one build-up which had been tested to BS 8414?
No, because the BBA certificate was still valid. I do accept that we should have acted sooner in 2014 when that certificate changed.
So you don't accept that proceeding on the basis of what I think you're bound to accept as a manifestly erroneous BBA certificate, which at best simply led you back into the arms of the manufacturer, was regrettable. You don't accept that?
We were following a route to compliance that was allowed for within the statutory guidance.
And you don't see the other side of the argument, is that right?
It's not that I don't see the other side of the argument. Our role is to apply the regulations and the guidance that supports those, and I believe that's what we did.
Now, I don't want to take you through the chronology of the meetings with Kingspan, largely because you didn't attend them, but is it right to say that despite the threats to do so, at no time did NHBC stop using Kingspan K15 in external wall build-ups above 18 metres?
We imposed different actions through the course of 2014 and 2015, but those actions resulted in different ways of demonstrating compliance.
Is that a reference to BCA Technical Guidance Note 18?
Yes.
Right. So does that answer tell us that Technical Guidance Note 18 was the solution which would permit NHBC to continue to accept K15?
No. The BCA guidance note was created prior to the change in BBA certificate. It was instigated in late 2013, I believe. It didn't get published until June 2014, but that was in consultation with the broader building control industry and in agreement with all those consulted through the technical group and the executive group.
Then I'm going to have to ask the question again. Is it right to say that despite threats to do so, at no time did NHBC stop using Kingspan K15 in external wall build-ups over 18 metres? As a fact, is that correct?
Yes,
Yes.
with different levels of evidence.
And those different levels of evidence were those generated as a result of the BCA's Technical Guidance Note 18, drafted by John Lewis.
The guidance note was drafted by John Lewis, and it was then taken to a broad range of members of the BCA technical group, all of whom had the opportunity to comment, make observations, challenge the content, or otherwise. It was then, once concluded, taken to the BCA executive, again, where there was an opportunity of all of the representative bodies to make any comments or observations on the content of that document. And after its publication was shared with MHCLG officials who were copied into all of the technical group meetings and could have made any observations around its content.
Miss Marshall, I'm sorry. That answer is a long answer, full of facts, none of which is an answer to my question. Let me see if I can get to it a different way. Can we go to your statement, please? Paragraph 57, page 14. Now, at paragraph 57, you say, as I go on to explain below, I tasked Steve Evans to further investigate the issue. With Kingspan, the BCA guidance note was born out of the concerns that resulted from that investigation. Now, what were the concerns that resulted from that investigation?
I think that's probably badly worded. The BCA guidance note was concluded.
Well, what were the concerns?
Well, the concerns were the removal of the statement about the certificate holder.
Well, the draft, I thought you'd accepted this earlier, the draft of what became the BCA guidance note, Technical Guidance Note 18, issue 0, published in June 2014, was created by John Lewis in November 2013, after the Wintec meeting, in fact, pretty much immediately afterwards, some month or so before the removal of the contact the manufacturer phrase from the BBA certificate. So that can't be right, can it, what you've just told us?
No, I suppose the sequence of events was the BCA guidance note was created as a result of the initial comments and confusion caused by the comments made by NHBC staff in late 2013 I suppose it was compounded by the change in BBA certificate in early 2014, and the BCA guidance note addressed both of those concerns.
So is this right, then, that in part at least, the BCI guidance note was born out of a concern, or the concern, that K15 was not a material of limited combustibility and therefore could not satisfy the linear route to compliance and only had one BS 8414 test to support its use in a particular configuration?
My understanding was that the BCA guidance note was addressing a number of concerns.
One of which I'm suggesting to you is the one I've just identified.
Quite possibly, yes.
Well, you say possibly. This is your witness statement, and you say the BCA guidance note was born out of the concerns that resulted from that investigation. Now, all I'm trying to ask you to do, please, is just to tell us what those concerns were.
Well, the concerns were twofold. The issue in relation to the comments received from surveyors around the confusion on materials of limited combustibility, and the second issue in relation to the certificate holder statement.
Right. Now, can you confirm that you were part of the BCA Executive Committee that approved the BCA Technical Guidance Note 18, which was published in June 2014?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm assuming that you were familiar before then, but certainly by then, with the the two routes to compliance. In fact, 3 routes to compliance if you include holistic fire engineering solutions in ADB.
Well, there are 4 routes to compliance in ADB.
Oh, which is the 4th?
Well, the options 1 to 4.
Oh, right. Now let's look at your statement at paragraph 134, page 30. You say this: I was not involved in the detailed analysis and drafting of the technical points of producing the guidance notes, including the BCA guidance note, as I have been in the management side of building control since 2001. Whilst I keep myself up to date from a professional point of view, I recognise that this management role means I no longer hold the day-to-day technical expertise on specific new developments. Excuse me. Now, BCA Technical Guidance Note 18 was adopted as NHBC policy, wasn't it?
Yes.
But it wasn't in fact adopted as NHBC policy, I don't think, until February 2015, was it?
It was introduced in February 2015, backdated to 1st of January 2014.
Yes. Did you not think at the time that you should have been up to date with the technical points that it raised?
I think because of the ongoing dialogue with Kingspan in relation to promised tests and third-party reviews, we were trying to engage with them to get that information. I don't know if we received option 1 and option 3 reports prior to its formal introduction in February 15.
Well, according to John Lewis, they trickled in from January 2014 and then increased somewhat after the publication in June 2014. Can you quarrel with that?
No, I'd have to take his word for that.
No. Who made the decision that the BCA guidance note should be adopted as NHBC policy?
I think I would have discussed it with Steve Evans and possibly John Lewis. It was common practice for us to adopt the BCA guidance notes because they were generally reflective of a broad industry view on a significant technical issue.
And why did it take until February 2015, more than a year after the change to the BBA certificate itself and some 18 months or so after Wintec had brought the problem to you?
Because of our ongoing engagement with Kingspan to try and resolve the issue.
It's quite a long period. Did it not occur to you before February 2015 that something needed to be done rather sooner?
In hindsight, yes, we should have been more robust with Kingspan. We should have pushed them harder for test information. But the feedback that I was getting from Mr. Evans was that at meetings they were promising test results, giving outline timetables for producing the test results. They committed to appoint both BRE and ARUP to do an independent review, which would have supported some of their information. But it became apparent that there were delaying tactics, and we should have recognised that sooner. I think the thing that, although the formal adoption of the policy was in 2015, I believe an update email from Mr. Evans in August 14 asked surveyors and project managers to log all projects and raise awareness of the issue with our customer base so that they could consider alternatives.
Let's look at the technical guidance note itself then. NHB 50760, please. That's page 1, issue 0, June 2014. I'm going to assume, Ms. Marshall, that you're familiar with this document.
Yes.
Is that a fair assumption?
I've seen it several times.
Yes. Let's go to page 2, option 1. Option 1, the use of materials of limited combustibility for all elements of the cladding system, both above and below 18 metres. This includes the insulation, internal lining board and the external facing material. Smaller gasket parts and similar low-risk items can be excluded from this requirement. The definition of a MOLC, material of limited combustibility, is stated in Table A7 of ADB 2. Now, all elements of the cladding system, did that include the rain screen panel, to your understanding?
Yes.
And external facing material, did that include the external panel?
Yes.
And presumably all parts of a composite external panel, including the core, yes?
Yes.
And had that always been your understanding?
I think, as I explained earlier, in relation to some of the commentary around filler, etc., my view prior to 2014 was... I didn't have a view because I hadn't actually applied that requirement of the regulation. So in 2014, when this was discussed internally, both John Lewis and Steve Evans advised of a common interpretation which was supported by the rest of the BCA technical group.
Right. So you say it was the word filler within 12.7?
Yes.
Yes.
Etc.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, John Lewis says etc. You say filler, and Steve Evans says it stands to reason. I think I've summarised his evidence. But for you, it was the word filler, was it?
Yes, I think that's the point that we sought clarification on in relation to communications with MHCLG. I believe it was filler rather than the etc., but I could be mistaken in terms of the content of that email.
Now, looking at option 3, if we go to your statement, please, at page 37, we'll come back to the text if we need to, but go to page 37 of your statement, para 173, where you deal with option 3 desktop reports. You say this: prior to issue 0 of the BCA guidance note in June 2014, I cannot be sure if I was aware of the existence of desktop reports which concluded that the use of any combustible product would satisfy the criteria in BR 135. Also, I'm not aware of NHBC relying on any desktop report prior to the issue of the BCA guidance note, which concluded that the combustible product would satisfy the criteria in BR 135. Does that mean that desktops were introduced by the NHBC in Technical Guidance Note 18, Issue 0, in June 2014, without anybody at the NHBC actually ever having had prior experience of one?
Well, I think, as I say, I don't know if we received desktop reports. I'm aware of John Lewis's evidence where he said that they were starting to be seen in early 2014, but I can't confirm that.
At the time, did you not think to ask John Lewis or indeed anybody else at NHBC whether they'd seen any of these desktop assessments and what they thought of them before enshrining the possibility of getting one as an alternative route to compliance in option 3?
Well, the decision to introduce option 3 as a BCA guidance note was done by the BCA technical group and the BCA executive on the basis that that was a route to compliance that existed within the approved documents.
Sorry, question again. I'll ask it by reference to the BCA, but before I do, question again, did you think to ask John Lewis or anybody else at the NHBC, who after all had drafted and put forward option 3, whether they'd seen any desktop assessments before and what they thought of them. Did you do that?
Not specifically, but we would have had assessments in lieu of test for a variety of products and materials previously.
But what about for an entire tall building envelope?
Not to my knowledge.
No. And that's what BCA Technical Guidance Note 18 is addressing, isn't it? An external wall of a tall building.
Yes, it's reflecting the assessment in lieu of test.
Same question in relation to BCA. Did you ask anybody in the BCA, outside NHBC, whether they had seen these desktop assessments before in relation to a whole building envelope and what they thought of them?
No,
Why not?
because I had assumed that the members of the technical group that reviewed the draft and agreed the version to present to the executive committee would have debated the content and addressed any concerns that they had with it.
So you weren't troubled by not knowing one way or the other whether desktop assessments were part of a positive experience by fire engineers and experienced other fire professionals?
The concept of desktop assessments has been within the approved documents for a number of years, so we would see them on a variety of products and systems. So I didn't see this as being significantly different.
Well, did it not occur to you that there may be a significant difference because there's a whole section of ADB devoted to external walls on buildings above 18 metres? Did you ask yourself the question, I wonder how these desktop assessments might be applied using the provisions of ADB to the external walls of tall buildings?
No, I didn't.
And therefore you presumably didn't think to ask anybody else how that might work?
No, I think given the fact that it was debated widely within the technical group, that would have been considered and discussed.
Did you ask anybody why it was that historically large-scale, full-system fire tests done under 8414 had not been the subject of an extrapolation into a desktop assessment beforehand? Before that?
No.
Why is that?
I don't know if we received desktop assessments for those elements previously.
Right. Did anybody at NHBC have first-hand experience of large-scale fire testing?
I can't answer that question. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Was any study undertaken within NHBC before signing off on option 3, or before agreeing that the BCA could do so, to see whether they had ever been produced in respect of an external wall build-up above 18 metres, by whom, in respect of what products, using what test data, and using what methodology? Was any study undertaken like that?
Not to my knowledge.
Why not?
This was a BCA guidance note that was produced through the BCA, and the technical group would have discussed all pertinent points.
But do you have a reason? Because we've not seen any evidence, either from the BCA or from NHBC, of such a study. Now, we have to proceed on the basis that there wasn't one, and my simple question to you is, do you know why that is?
No.
If you didn't know why that was, and didn't know that there was a good reason for not having that study, how could NHBC, and you in particular, be at all confident that these desktop assessments now being put forward under option 3 for a full building envelope above 18 metres could be safely adopted?
Firstly, the limitations on who could produce a desktop assessment. So you're looking at the testing houses and qualified individuals to create those reports, and the specialism of our internal fire engineer in analysing, challenging and assessing those reports.
Did you consider specifically which part of approved document B supported the use of desktop assessments in place of specific tests in respect of the external wall build-up of buildings over 18 metres?
I wouldn't personally have considered it because it was done as part of the BCA guidance note. and it reflected what I understood to be contained within the approved document.
So did you understand that what was contained within the approved document applied or could be applied to an external wall build-up?
Yes.
How did you come to that understanding?
Because of the existence of the assessments in lieu of test contained within approved document B.
Did you yourself put Appendix A, which is where I think you are referring to extrapolable test data, next to Section 12 of approved document B and ask yourself how they fitted together?
It's another route to compliance through the statutory guidance that is available to follow, and it is replicating what is in that statutory guidance.
Sorry, I'm asking you what you did. Did you put Appendix A next to Section 12 of ADB and ask yourself, how do they fit together? Did you do that exercise?
No,
Why is that?
because it was an alternative that was available through the statutory guidance.
So you assumed that without investigating it?
No, I didn't assume. The BCA technical group proposed and debated the options available through approved document B.
I think the answer. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So I've lost my thread now. So,
But are you able to tell us what types of scientific analysis or parameters of comparison would allow the extrapolation of data from large-scale fire tests under BS 8414 to other systems which hadn't been tested through the medium of a desktop assessment?
I believe that there are guidance that John Lewis referred to in terms of what processes to follow. I think PFPF and other standards that set out how the assessment in lieu of test should be used.
Right. Now, he certainly referred to that in his evidence. Are you, in that answer, referring to the evidence he gave to the inquiry this week, or are you referring to something he told you at the time?
I'm referring to his evidence earlier this week.
Oh, I see. Did the BCA release any, I hesitate to use the word, but guidance or technical notes, perhaps, about how these reports should be produced in a manner that meant that the same principles and parameters and methodologies were being applied by each of those organisations identified to do them, so that they would be consistent and comparable?
I don't believe so, because it reflected what was already contained within the approved document, which could be referenced by anyone that chose to use the BCA guidance note.
Now, you're not a desktop expert, are you?
No.
And John Lewis had never had any first-hand experience in large-scale fire testing or writing reports like this. Given that, didn't you think that it was dangerous that John Lewis and Steve Evans, who himself had no fire engineering credentials, were producing guidance on these topics?
They produced a guidance note for debate amongst a broad range of technical experts within the BCA technical group, and agreement was such that it reflected what guidance already existed within the approved documents. So the guidance was already there and available for any building control professional to follow.
Did you think to consult the BRE or Chiltern or Warrington Fire, the test houses specifically identified in option 3, about the concept of extrapolating data from large-scale fire tests on external build-ups with differing materials without further testing?
I wouldn't have done that because this was a BCA guidance note. I don't know if BCA technical group did that. I don't believe they did, but it would have been for the BCA technical group to carry that out.
I think the answer is you didn't think of it.
No.
No. And you don't know anybody else who thought of it either?
Not to my knowledge.
No. And you can't presumably tell me, one way or the other, if it wasn't thought of by anybody on the BCA technical group, why that was?
No.
Now, we've heard evidence that there were concerns about the Option 3 reports, which began to be produced, I think, as a trickle in early 2014, but more in earnest after June, after this document was published, which contained opinions without sufficient scientific analysis. Were you aware of that?
I was aware about concerns of the quality of some of the reports, yes.
Did you take any action when you became aware of your concerns about, or the concerns of the quality?
It was to ensure that both John Lewis and Steve Evans maintained a robust approach to getting the right quality of reports coming through and not lower the standard of accepting anything that was poor quality.
Right, but were you not concerned that at source, those test houses and experts that you had identified to produce these documents weren't doing so to a sufficient standard? Was that not a concern you had?
I didn't consider it at the time.
We see later on in 2016 that you were part of an email chain with Brian Martin of DCLG, who himself expressed concern with the robustness of Option 3 reports. We can look at it if you like. You may remember it. But did it concern you, even at that time, that even though government were concerned about the quality of these desktops being produced, they were still being done?
No. I think, as I mentioned earlier, government, or Brian Martin, was aware of the production of the BCA guidance note. He supported it and accepted that it was a matter of a statement of the truth of the approved document. When it became apparent that the quality of some of these reports wasn't particularly good, that led us down the route of having the Facades Conference to try and educate the industry on what good looked like. And I know that there's email correspondence with Brian Martin to ensure that he came along to support setting the right boundaries for what reports should look like going forward.
Does that tell us that it was, in part at least, the concerns about the quality of desktop reports that led to the 2016 guidance note? The Nhbc
To a certain extent, yes.
guidance note?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, I said in part. I think you agree, yes.
Yes.
Right. We'll come back to desktop studies shortly, but I want to ask you about your relationship with Brian Martin, who at that point was working for the Department for Communities and Local Government. The department remains the same, its name has changed over the time. It was at that stage called the DCLG. When and where did you first meet Brian Martin?
I've known Brian for a number of years, so I couldn't recall exactly when we first met.
How would you describe your relationship with him?
A professional relationship where contact could be made for advice, opinion,
Right.
support in terms of presentations, conferences, etc.
What did you consider his role within DCLG to be?
I think when I first met with Brian, he was the lead on approved document B, and then I think he was promoted to head of technical policy at some point.
Yes. And what was his involvement with Nhbc?
There was no direct involvement other than correspondence around any topical matters that warranted a contact within MHCLG or DCLG as it was.
Now, we know he was a papers-only, or the department was a papers-only member of the BCA.
The BCA technical group, yes.
BCA technical group, yes,
Yes.
thank you. Now, I want to ask you about an email that he sent to your colleague Neil Smith on the 2nd of July 2014, which we can see you got to see and copy later that day, as we'll see. Can we go, please, to it? It's at NHB 50712. And if we go to the foot of the email chain, please, we can see that email. We go to the foot of the email chain on page 3. Brian Martin to Neil Smith, 2nd July 2014. Hi, Neil. I've been talking to a few folk about fire safety and facades recently. Allegedly, several buildings have been erected where PIR insulation has been used in cladding panels well over 18 metres in height. Apparently, people are under the impression that PIR is a material of limited combustibility, which it isn't. Again, allegedly, many of these buildings are blocks of flats. I've no idea how true these allegations are, but they come from relatively reliable sources. The purpose of my email is a friendly warning. You might want to double-check with your inspectors and plan checkers that they are on top of this. Happy to discuss. Regards, Brian. Now, if you go up the chain to page 2 at the bottom, you can see that later that day, Neil Smith forwards that to you. Hi, Diane. please can you suggest how I should respond? Regards, Neil. Do you see that?
Yes.
Foot of the screen. And you then ping that on up to Steve Evans. Were you concerned when you saw the email from Brian Martin that he was sending the NHBC a friendly warning in this way?
Concerned, yes, but because we shared the same concerns around the issues that he was raising. This wasn't new to NHBC. This was something that we were actively dealing with, and I believe Steve Evans had spent the last few months trying to get to the bottom of.
Yeah. Was your concern about the problem heightened or enhanced by the fact that government had now got hold of it and had come to you with it?
We were already concerned.
What did you do about this friendly warning when you saw it? Did you take it to the BCS board?
No, I asked Steve Evans, as you can see, I asked him to review and provide me with an update on where we were with the discussions and draft a response.
Yes, and if we go up the chain, we can see that Neil Smith sends the email to you, copies Graham Perrier in. If we just scroll up, please, to page 1. Sorry, I'm so sorry, page 2. We could see that he's copied in the email to you when it comes to you. You then send it on to Steve Evans, as you can see from page 2. Mm-hmm. And then if you scroll up, we can see what happens next, which is the draft that is sent to you on the 9th of July. Now, scrolling back down again, if I can, please, to page 2, at the foot of page 2, do you know why Neil Smith was asking you how he should respond?
I assume because the original issue was one that certainly Graham Perrier and Dave White were aware of, but the lead on the issue was Steve Evans. So Neil may not have been as up to speed on what the latest activities were from Graham, so approached me to offer advice.
And as I've just shown you, and you can see, you sent it on to Steve Evans a couple of days later, 4th July. Steve, can you review and update me on Kingspan discussion, which may be where this originates from? Given that Mr. Martin had mentioned cladding panels and PIR materials, of which K15 was neither, and makes no mention of Kingspan, as we've seen, why did you think that this might have originated from Kingspan?
Sorry, could you scroll down to the next page, please, so I can see the original email?
Yes, of course, page 3.
It talks about PIR insulation in his email, so that was why I thought it was in relation to Kingspan.
Well, Kingspan, technically is a phenolic insulation.
Yes.
But
well, it's the sort of, again, my colleague talked about how we put similar insulations into that family.
So, leaving aside the distinction between PIR and phenolic, connecting them as familiar in that way, did you think that this had originated from Kingspan because of the discussion about K15?
I don't know if that was the case, but that was the current issue that was in my mind in relation to insulation products, so I put 2 and 2 together.
Now, if we go to the top of the chain, page 1, we can see that Steve Evans sends a suggested draft back to you, and to you alone, on the 9th of July 2014. Can you see that?
Yes.
Did the two of you discuss the situation, issue, before this draft was written?
No, I don't believe he did. I think it was a summary of his involvement, which he would have been more familiar with than I would have been.
Did anybody, and when I say anybody, did you or he, Steve Evans, think to call Brian Martin and have a telephone conversation with him instead of responding via a formal email?
No, I think as the approach came through via email, it was appropriate to respond that way.
Yes, I mean, the approach was in pretty informal terms. As he himself says, it was a friendly warning. Was there a reason why you would have to send back a carefully drafted, crafted, written response rather than picking up the phone and chatting it through, but as it were, between friends?
I don't think it was carefully drafted. It was to appraise Brian of the background to the issue that we were having with Kingspan and the industry was having with Kingspan, to make sure that he was aware of all of the facts that we had in our possession at that point in time.
Well, that's a fair answer, but it addresses the substance. But I'm really just asking you about the format. Why was there a need to send back what I would suggest is a carefully worded, considered, structured email response rather than a friendly chat in response to a friendly warning delivered in less than formal tones?
It was a comprehensive response to a question that was being asked.
Now, the draft email that Steve Evans sends to you is slightly, but not materially, different from the email which Steve Evans then actually sent to Brian Martin on the 11th of July. Did you make changes to the draft that Steve Evans sent?
I don't recall making changes.
Was anybody else involved in drafting the response back to Brian Martin other than you, perhaps?
No, it would have been at Steve's instigation because he was far closer to this matter than I was.
Let's go to the email that's actually sent by Steve Evans in response to him on the 11th of July. It's at NHB 50732, please. We can see there it is, and you're copied, as is Neil Smith. And that's the response, in fact, the same day from Brian Martin, and underneath that we can see what Steve Evans sends to him that day. You see that? Dear Brian, I hope that you are well. Can you see that?
Yes.
And I'll read it to you. Neil Smith has discussed your email with me below and has asked me to respond as I've been dealing with this on behalf of NHBC. This is an issue that NHBC are aware of and have been in discussions with industry about for some time. The issue is in respect of the use of Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board in buildings over 18 metres in height. The confusion has arisen from Kingspan's statement that their product is acceptable for use in a building over 18 metres. However, the product is made from a generic type of polyurethane foam, which is by nature combustible. However, since 27th October 2008, the product held a BBA certificate attached, which indicates that it's acceptable for use in accordance with approved document B, Volume 2, paragraph 12.7, 7.1, subject to advice being should be sought from the certificate holder, 7.2, if the building exceeds 18 metres in height. It was on this basis that NHBC Building Control and other building control bodies accepted the use of K15 in buildings over 18 metres in height, including in blocks of flats. We understand that LABC have also issued a registered detail approving the material for use over 18 metres. In January of this year, we were made aware of a revised BBA certificate for K15, issued on 17th December 2013, also attached. The new certificate removed the passage which indicated that it was acceptable for use in accordance with approved document B, Volume 2, paragraph 12.7, and instead states that the product will not contribute to the development stages of a fire, but that it has only been tested and is therefore only suitable for one specific construction on masonry walls, 8.2. Now, just stopping there, I just want to ask you about this section of this response. Why did you believe that Brian Martin's concerns extended only to K15?
I think, again, it was an issue that we were aware of, and the way that his email was worded, two and two together, and responded on the issue that we had known about.
Did you understand from what was written in those paragraphs that Steve Evans was putting forward the references in the pre-January 2014 BBA certificates to 12.7 and the contact the manufacturer provision as the reason why K15 had been accepted on buildings over 18 metres by Nhbc until the certificate change.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Did you understand from these paragraphs here that Steve Evans was putting forward the references in the pre-January 2014 BBA certificate to 12.7 and the contact the manufacturer provision as the reason why K15 had historically been accepted on buildings over 18 metres by Nhbc up to the point at which the certificate changed?
If you could scroll back up to the previous page.
Yes, page 1, please, bottom of page 1.
Yes.
Yes. Now, given that, as we've established, I think, you knew before January 2014 that K15 shouldn't be used above 18 metres unless it met the requirements of BR135, not least because you'd learnt that fact by the latest at the time you'd got the Wintec meeting notes from John Lewis and his analysis that followed. My question is, why are you identifying the changes to the K15 BBA certificate at the end of 2013 as the reason that this issue had arisen?
I think Steve was giving background to the issues around the BBA certificate to answer the question that Brian had posed.
The email to Brian Martin also says that K15 had held a BBA certificate since 2008, which indicated that it could be used in accordance with 12.7 of ADB. Now, in fact, the reference to 12.7 was only included in the certificate in the 6 months between July and December 2013. Was that known to you or not?
I thought it was the 2010 certificate that had 12.7 included.
Did you check the BBA certificates to which you were referring when you compiled this email?
I didn't compile the email.
When you went through it with Steve Evans?
No, I trusted Steve to quote the facts of the case without challenge.
Do you know, given that the reference to 12.7 in the BBA certificate was, maybe you don't accept this, but was always self-evidently erroneous, why was Nhbc purporting to make its removal from the BBA certificate in December 2013 a matter of relevance when addressing his question?
To provide context and background.
Did you deliberately use 2008 as the start date for the reference to 12.7 to make it look as if the BBA reference to 12.7 had been in circulation for many years and not just a few months in 2013 in order to strengthen Nhbc's historical position?
As Steve drafted the email, I can't answer that question.
And did you intend Brian Martin to think that you'd been taken in by and relied on the erroneous statements in the BBA certificate?
I think the statement in that paragraph sets out why Nhbc were accepting the use of K15 in accordance with the BBA certificate.
Given that it was well known that the family of plastics, phenolic, insulation, PIR and PUR, were never materials of limited combustibility, why did you think that Brian Martin would believe that you'd been misled by the BBA's certificate's reference to 12.7, as opposed to dismissing it as a manifest mistake?
I can't answer that.
Well, I'm asking you to. Is it you don't have an answer?
Well, could you rephrase?
Well, given that it was well known, as I think you accepted right at the start of your evidence today, that the family of insulations, which included phenolic, PIR and PUR, were never materials of limited combustibility. My question is, why did you think Brian Martin would believe that you had been misled by the BBA certificate's reference to 12.7, as opposed to dismissing it as an obvious mistake?
I assume that Steve included it in his email to provide context to the background to the issue with Kingspan.
Now, we also see in this email a reference to the LABC registered detail. And if we go to your statement first, at page 34, we can see paragraph 154. And you say there, since my time working at NHBC, I've had nothing to do with LABC type approval certificates, and NHBC placed no reliance on these certificates. This includes for K15 or RS5000 products. I did not read or become aware of the LABC type approval or system approval certificates for K15 or RS5000 prior to 14th June 2017. Now, you saw and I think approved Steve Evans's response to Brian Martin, which refers in terms to the LABC registered detail, doesn't it? On which NHBC said it had also relied.
No, well, if you can go back to the email.
Yes. Let's go back to it then. It's a NHB 50732.
I don't believe that Steve's commentary says that we are reliant on an LABC certificate. It's a statement of fact.
Well, if I read this to you, I thought, but if you go to the very foot of page 1 on your screen, it says, we understand that LABC have also issued a registered detail approving the material for use over 18 metres. And my question is given your attitude, NHBC's attitude to LABC registered details, why was it relevant or helpful to use the fact that LABC had issued one for K15 as a point of reliance?
It wasn't a point of reliance. It was a statement of fact that we were aware, or Steve Evans was aware through the BCA, that LABC had a registered detail accepting the product that may give an indication as to why it was being used more widely.
Well, what was the relevance of referring to LABC there?
Purely for context.
But the problem with that is that NHBC have nothing to do with LABC approvals and never place reliance on them. Why placing reliance on it now, even as a contextual question?
Again, I don't think we were placing reliance of it. We were giving Brian Martin background to the situation in relation to that product, which he'd asked for.
Some people might think that you were casting about for further support and fastened on the fact of the LABC registered detail as further support.
No, not at all. I would refute that. And I think having done some research through correspondence that Steve had with LABC and hearing their statements, I believe that Steve was raising concerns over the registered detail.
Mr. Chairman, we're slightly in the middle of this email, and there are quite a few further questions to run on it, and I will not finish them. It'll take about 15 minutes to finish.
Might be better to stop there, might it?
It might be. We are halfway through, though, and this is we're pressing pause rather than a natural break.
Right. Well, I think we've probably had enough for today anyway, Ms. Marshall. So we'll finish there. We'll resume, please, at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And once again, please don't discuss your evidence or anything relating to it while you're away from the room. All right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Millett. 10 o'clock tomorrow, then, please. Thank you.